Let me start by saying I never thought I was the type to start my own business. For 6 years, I was Jake Lawson, Senior Account Manager at Crestline Marketing Group in Austin, Texas. I was the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and somehow always managed to pull rabbits out of hats when clients needed miracles. I was also, apparently, the guy with attitude problems. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Crestline wasn't a bad place to work, at least not when I started in 2017. It was a mid-sized digital marketing agency with about 40 employees, nestled in one of those converted warehouses in East Austin that screamed we're creative but also serious about business. The kind of place that had exposed brick walls, a craft beer tap in the break room, and motivational posters about disrupting the status quo, which, in hindsight, was pretty ironic. When I joined as a junior account manager, I was hungry. Fresh out of UT with a communications degree and a head full of ideas about how marketing could actually help small businesses compete with the big players. I threw myself into learning everything I could about digital strategy, content marketing, social media optimization, and data analytics. While other junior employees focused on climbing the corporate ladder through office politics, I focused on results. And the results spoke for themselves. In my first year, I helped grow 3 client accounts by over 150%. By year 2, I was managing a portfolio worth $2.3 million annually. By year 4, I was the go-to guy for problem accounts, the clients who were thinking about jumping ship, the campaigns that weren't performing, the relationships that had gone sour. I had a gift for understanding what clients actually needed versus what they said they wanted. More importantly, I built real relationships. Not the surface level how about those Longhorns small talk, but genuine partnerships where I understood their business models, their pain points, their long-term goals. I knew that Maria Gonzalez at Tierra Verde Landscaping was trying to expand into commercial contracts. I knew that David Kim at Fusion Tech was struggling with customer retention post-sale. I knew that Samantha Price at Bloom and Butter Skincare was worried about competing with major brands entering the natural beauty space. These weren't just accounts to me, they were real people building real businesses, and I took that responsibility seriously. Which brings me to Greg Whitmore. Greg had founded Crestline in 2010, riding the wave of businesses realizing they needed to get digital or get left behind. In the early days, I'm sure he was scrappy and client-focused. But by the time I really started interacting with him as a senior account manager, Greg had developed what I can only describe as founder's syndrome. He believed his own press releases. He thought every idea that came out of his mouth was gold, every strategy he suggested was genius, and every client relationship existed because of his personal charm and vision. The truth was messier. Greg was stuck in 2015 marketing tactics. He still talked about going viral like it was a guaranteed outcome if you just posted enough content. He pitched every client on synergistic omnichannel experiences, without seeming to understand what those words actually meant. He promised results he couldn't deliver and timelines that defied physics. But here's the thing about being a founder: when you own the company, your bad ideas don't get you fired. They get implemented. And then when they don't work, someone else takes the blame. For years, I had managed to work around Greg's limitations. When he'd promise a client we could get them 10,000 new social media followers in 30 days, I'd quietly develop a more realistic content strategy focused on engagement and conversion. When he'd commit us to launching a complete rebrand in 2 weeks, I'd work overtime to manage expectations while delivering something that actually moved the needle. I thought I was being a good employee. I thought I was protecting the company and serving our clients. What I didn't realize was that I was making Greg look good while slowly building a reputation as someone who pushed back and had attitude problems. The cracks really started showing in early 2023. Austin's tech scene was getting more competitive, and several of our mid-sized clients were being courted by larger agencies from Dallas and Houston. Instead of innovating or improving our service delivery, Greg's response was to double down on the same strategies that were already failing. In January, we lost our first major client, a fintech startup called Velocity Pay. They'd been with us for 3 years, and their contract was worth $180,000 annually. When they gave their notice, citing lack of strategic innovation and unclear ROI metrics, Greg called an all-hands meeting to discuss the betrayal of disloyal clients. He never once asked why they left or what we could have done better. By March, we were hemorrhaging smaller accounts too. Greg's solution was to mandate that all account managers spend more time on relationship building, which, in Greg speak, meant taking clients to expensive lunches and talking about everything except the actual performance of their campaigns. This is where my attitude problem really started to show. In our weekly strategy meetings, I began pushing back more directly. When Greg suggested we pitch a struggling restaurant client on a $50,000 influencer campaign, I pointed out that their target demographic was local families, not Instagram food bloggers. When he wanted to promise a retail client that we could increase their e-commerce sales by 300% in 3 months, I showed him data proving that even our best-performing accounts had grown incrementally over time. "Jake, you're being negative," became Greg's standard response to any data-driven pushback. "We need to think bigger. We need to be bold. That's how we win." The breaking point came on a Monday morning in late March. Spring in Austin was just hitting its stride. That perfect weather before the summer heat makes you question why anyone lives in Texas. I'd spent the weekend preparing for a client presentation to Linksa, an AI-powered customer service startup that was one of our biggest accounts at $240,000 annually. Linksa's founder, Rebecca Chen, was brilliant but demanding. She measured everything and expected her marketing partners to do the same. She wanted detailed analytics, A/B testing results, conversion tracking, and clear ROI calculations for every dollar spent. In other words, she wanted exactly the kind of strategic, data-driven approach that I specialized in. I'd developed a comprehensive Q2 strategy for Linksa that included targeted LinkedIn campaigns for B2B lead generation, content marketing focused on customer service automation trends, and a speaking engagement program to position Rebecca as a thought leader in the space. I had 3 months of data showing which approaches were working, which needed optimization, and what our realistic growth targets should be. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:45, Greg knocked on my office door. "Hey, I'm going to take the lead on this one," he said, not really asking. "The Linksa presentation. I've been working on this strategy for weeks. Rebecca specifically requested." "I know, but I want to pitch her on something bigger. Something that'll really blow her away." My heart sank. "What did you have in mind?" Greg's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded disaster. "A complete rebrand. New logo, new website, new messaging framework. We position Linksa as the Tesla of customer service AI. We're talking Super Bowl ad, Times Square billboard, the works. Multi-million-dollar campaign." I stared at him. "Greg, Linksa is a B2B startup with 12 employees. They're not ready for a multi-million-dollar brand campaign. They need lead generation and customer acquisition. Rebecca has been very clear about." "See, this is what I'm talking about, Jake. You're thinking small. You're not seeing the big picture." The big picture is that Rebecca measures ROI down to the penny. She's going to ask for data, projections, and proof that. Rebecca's going to love it because it's bold. It's visionary. It's the kind of thinking that separates good agencies from great ones. I tried one more time. "Should we at least discuss the budget implications? The timeline? How this fits with her current business objectives?" Greg's expression hardened. "Jake, I appreciate your attention to detail, but sometimes you need to trust leadership to see the bigger strategy. This is why I founded this company, to think beyond the spreadsheets and data points that hold other agencies back." The meeting was a disaster. Rebecca sat through Greg's Tesla comparison with the kind of polite, frozen smile that anyone who's worked with clients learns to recognize as barely contained frustration. When he started talking about Times Square billboards, she actually interrupted him. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some miscommunication about our objectives," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "We're looking for measurable lead generation and customer acquisition strategies. We're a B2B company selling to enterprise clients. Brand awareness isn't our primary concern right now." Greg doubled down. "But that's exactly why this approach is so powerful, Rebecca. You're thinking like everyone else in your space. We're talking about making Linksa a household name. We don't need to be a household name. We need to be known by CTOs and customer service directors at Fortune 500 companies." "Right, but imagine if." "I think we need to table this discussion," Rebecca said, closing her laptop. "Jake, Could you send me the Q2 analysis we discussed last week? I'd like to review the data before we move forward. After she left, Greg was furious. Not at himself for ignoring months of client communication and relationship building. At me. Why didn't you back me up in there? He demanded as soon as we were alone in the conference room. Greg, she asked for a specific type of strategy. She's been consistent about her needs since. She asked for marketing expertise, and that's what I gave her. The problem is you've been filling her head with all this micro-targeting, data-obsessed nonsense. She can't see the forest for the trees. I felt something snap inside me. The nonsense you're talking about has grown her qualified leads by 89% over the past 6 months. The micro-targeting has reduced her customer acquisition cost by 34%. She's getting measurable results from our partnership, and she knows it. Results that anyone could have achieved with basic digital marketing. What I'm talking about is transformation. Evolution. Taking Linksa to the next level. She doesn't want to go to the next level yet, Greg. She wants to optimize the level she's on. That's good business. See, this is your problem, Jake. You're so focused on making clients comfortable that you're not challenging them to grow. You're not thinking strategically. The words came out before I could stop them. I'm thinking about what she actually needs instead of what makes us the most money. The silence that followed was deafening. Greg's face went through several color changes. What did you just say? I realized I'd crossed a line, but I was too frustrated to back down completely. I said I'm focused on what the client needs. Rebecca has specific business objectives, and our job is to help her achieve them, not to sell her services that don't align with her goals. Our job, Greg said slowly, is to provide marketing leadership. To guide clients toward strategies that will grow their businesses, even if they don't immediately see the value. That's why they hire agencies instead of doing it in-house. But if they specifically tell us that brand awareness isn't their priority, then it's our job to show them why it should be. Jesus, Jake, do you think Steve Jobs asked customers what they wanted before he invented the iPhone? I almost laughed. Are you comparing a Super Bowl ad campaign to the iPhone? I'm talking about vision. About leadership. About understanding that sometimes the best service we can provide is to push clients beyond their comfort zone. And if they fire us because we're pushing them toward strategies that don't serve their business, then they weren't the right clients for us anyway. That's when I realized that Greg and I fundamentally disagreed about what our business was supposed to be. He saw Crestline as a creative agency that sold big ideas and transformative campaigns. I saw it as a strategic partner that helped businesses achieve specific, measurable goals. Neither perspective was inherently wrong, but they weren't compatible. And since Greg owned the company, his perspective was the only one that mattered. The conversation ended with Greg telling me to adjust my attitude and remember that leadership means supporting company decisions, even when you don't immediately understand the strategy. I went back to my office and did something I'd never done in 6 years at Crestline. I started updating my resume. But before I could figure out my next move, Greg made it for me. The firing came exactly 1 week later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., grabbed my usual cold brew from the kitchen, and settled in to review campaign performance reports before the day got chaotic. I had 3 client calls scheduled, a campaign optimization project due by noon, and a strategy presentation to finalize for Thursday. I never got to any of it. At 9:15 a.m., Dana Brooks from HR knocked on my office door. Dana was one of those rare HR managers who actually seemed to care about employees as people rather than just resources to be managed. She was soft-spoken, fair, and had a reputation for trying to mediate conflicts before they escalated to formal discipline. The fact that she looked uncomfortable should have been my first warning sign. Jake, could you come with me to Conference Room B? Greg would like to speak with you. Conference Room B was the small, windowless room we used for difficult conversations. Performance reviews that weren't going well. Layoff notifications. Terminations. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe this was about the Linksa situation. Maybe Greg had cooled off and wanted to discuss a compromise approach. Maybe Rebecca had called with feedback, and we needed to pivot the strategy. Greg was already seated at the conference table when I walked in, looking like a man who'd made up his mind about something and wasn't interested in discussion. He didn't make eye contact or offer his usual fake friendly greeting. Dana closed the door and sat down with a manila folder that I somehow knew contained my employment termination paperwork. "Jake, we need to discuss some ongoing concerns about your performance and attitude," Greg began without preamble. "Over the past several months, I've noticed a pattern of behavior that's concerning for someone in a senior position." I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. What kind of behavior? Resistance to company strategy. Undermining leadership decisions in front of clients. Creating an adversarial dynamic in team meetings. He was reading from notes, like he'd prepared a script. Last week's meeting with Rebecca Chen was particularly problematic. Problematic how? She asked for the Q2 analysis I prepared, which means she's still interested in working with us. She asked for your analysis because you've been positioning yourself as her primary contact instead of supporting the broader company relationship. You've made her dependent on your specific approach instead of helping her see the value of Crestline's strategic vision. This was insane. "Greg, I've been managing the Linkser account for 8 months. I built that relationship by understanding her business needs and delivering measurable results. She trusts my judgment because I've earned that trust. And that's exactly the problem." Greg leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he used when he thought he was delivering profound wisdom. "You've created a situation where the client is more loyal to you than to the company. That's not sustainable, and it's not professional." I looked at Dana, hoping for some kind of support or at least clarification about what was happening. She avoided eye contact and focused on the paperwork in front of her. "I don't understand," I said finally. "Are you saying that building strong client relationships is a problem?" "I'm saying that building relationships that circumvent company leadership is a problem. I'm saying that consistently pushing back against strategic decisions is a problem. I'm saying that your attitude has become disruptive to team morale and company culture." The word attitude again. The magical catch-all term that meant you're not agreeing with me, and I don't like it. "Can you give me specific examples of disruptive behavior? Performance issues? Client complaints?" Greg's jaw tightened. "Jake, this isn't a negotiation. This is a notification. After careful consideration, we've decided that your position at Crestline is no longer a good fit for either party." The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 years. 6 years of early mornings and late nights, of pulling miracles out of thin air, of growing accounts and saving relationships and building something I was proud of. And it was ending in a windowless conference room because I had attitude problems. "You're firing me. We're ending your employment, effective immediately. Dana will go over the details with you." I turned to Dana, who finally looked up from her paperwork. Her expression was sympathetic but resigned. "Jake, we'll need you to gather your personal belongings and return your company laptop, keys, and credit card. We'll provide a reference letter confirming your employment dates and final title." "What about my clients? My active projects? The Linkser presentation is Thursday." "We'll handle the transition," Greg interrupted. "Carla will take over your accounts temporarily while we redistribute responsibilities." Carla Mendez was the project coordinator who'd become my closest friend at Crestline. She was smart, organized, and great with clients, but she didn't have the strategic background or relationship history to manage major accounts. Dropping my portfolio on her with no notice wasn't fair to her or the clients. "Greg, some of these relationships took years to build. Shouldn't we at least discuss a transition plan that?" "Jake." His voice was sharp now, with an edge I'd never heard before. "You're not an employee here anymore. These aren't your clients or your projects. They're Crestline's." That's when the reality of the situation really hit me. Not only was I losing my job, but I was losing 6 years of professional relationships, projects I'd invested months of work in, and strategies I'd developed that would now be implemented by other people who might not understand the nuances behind them. I felt angry and humiliated and confused all at the same time. But underneath all of that, I felt something else, a cold, clarifying fury at the injustice of it all. "Is there anything I can do to change your mind? Any way we can work this out?" Greg's expression shifted into something that might have been pity if there hadn't been so much smugness mixed in. Jake, I'm going to give you some free advice, and I hope you'll take it in the spirit it's intended. This industry is smaller than you think, especially in Austin. Word gets around about people who are difficult to work with, who don't respect company leadership, who put their own ego ahead of team success. He paused, and I realized he was building up to something. I'd hate for your reputation to be damaged by the way this situation played out. I'd hate for other agencies to hear that you were terminated for performance and attitude issues. So I'm going to suggest that you take some time to really think about what kind of professional you want to be going forward. There it was. The threat wrapped up in fake concern. What are you saying, exactly? I'm saying that how this story gets told depends a lot on how you handle yourself moving forward. If you leave quietly and professionally, we can all move on. But if you decide to make this difficult, if you try to poach clients or spread negativity about Crestline, well, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Dana was staring at her hands. I could see that even she was uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Are you threatening me? Greg's smile was ice cold. I'm explaining how the industry works. Reputation matters, Jake. And right now, yours is in my hands. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. I looked around the conference room, the motivational posters about teamwork and excellence, the whiteboard still covered with notes from last week's brainstorming session, the Austin skyline visible through the small window. 6 years of my professional life, ending in threats and humiliation. I need to clean out my office. Dana will escort you, Greg said, standing up. And Jake. I hope you land on your feet. I really do. Just remember what we talked about. The next hour was a blur of packing personal items into a cardboard box while Dana hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Carla appeared in my doorway about halfway through, her eyes wide with shock. Jake, what's happening? Greg just told me I'm taking over your accounts. I looked around to make sure Dana was out of earshot. I've been terminated. Effective immediately. What? Why? Attitude problems, apparently. Carla's expression shifted from shock to anger. That's insane. You're the best account manager we have. Half our clients specifically ask for you. Apparently that was part of the problem. She lowered her voice. This is about the Linksa meeting, isn't it? Greg's been in a mood all week. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more without getting emotional. Jake, this is so wrong. You know that, right? This isn't about your performance or your attitude. This is about Greg's ego. I packed the last of my personal items, a coffee mug from a client, some books on digital marketing strategy, a few awards from industry publications. Maybe. But it doesn't matter now. As I walked toward the exit with my box of belongings, I passed the break room where several colleagues were gathered around the coffee machine. The conversation stopped when they saw me. I could see the questions in their eyes, but no one said anything. At the front door, Dana handed me my final paycheck and a reference letter. Jake, for what it's worth, I think this is a mistake. You're a good employee and a good person. Thanks, Dana. Take care of yourself. I walked to my car in the parking lot, put the box in the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Carla. Call me tonight. We need to talk. As I drove home to my apartment in East Austin, Greg's words kept echoing in my head. You'll never work in this city again. I'll make sure of it. Maybe he was right. Maybe my career in Austin marketing was over. Or maybe, I thought as I pulled into my parking space, it was just getting started. The first 2 weeks after the firing were brutal. Not just financially, though burning through savings while job hunting wasn't fun, but psychologically. I'd never been fired before. I'd never had my professional competence questioned or my character assassinated by someone who was supposed to be a leader. I spent the first few days oscillating between rage and self-doubt. Maybe Greg was right. Maybe I was difficult to work with. Maybe I did have attitude problems that I couldn't see. Maybe I'd been fooling myself about my capabilities and contributions. Then I started hearing from clients. The first call came from David Kim at Fusion Tech, 3 days after my termination. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through job boards and wondering if I should expand my search to Dallas or Houston, when my phone rang. Jake? It's David Kim. I just got the strangest call from Greg Whitmore. My stomach clenched. Oh. He called to let me know that you were no longer with the company and that Carla would be handling our account going forward. But here's the weird part, he spent about 10 minutes explaining why you'd been let go. Something about performance issues and attitude problems and not being a team player. I closed my eyes. So it was starting already. The reputation destruction campaign. David, Jake, I've worked with you for 2 years. I've never had a single complaint about your performance or your attitude. Hell, you're the reason we stayed with Crestline when we were thinking about switching to a larger agency. So either you had a complete personality transplant in the past month, or Greg is full of shit. The relief I felt was overwhelming. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. Look, I can't get involved in whatever happened between you two, but I want you to know that from a client perspective, you've been nothing but professional and effective. If you land somewhere else, give me a call. The second call came from Maria Gonzalez at Tierra Verde Landscaping. Then Samantha Price at Bloom and Butter. Then 3 other clients from smaller accounts I'd managed over the years. The pattern was the same every time. Greg had called them personally to manage the transition and had spent considerable time explaining why I was no longer with the company. And every single client had the same reaction: confusion, skepticism, and mild irritation at having their intelligence insulted. Jake, Samantha said during our call, I don't know what kind of game Greg is playing, but he basically spent 20 minutes telling me why you were a terrible employee. Which was weird, because you've been fantastic to work with. Also, it seemed really unprofessional to trash talk a former employee to clients. By the end of the first week, I'd heard from 7 different clients. All of them reported similar conversations with Greg. All of them expressed confusion about the disconnect between Greg's characterization and their direct experience working with me. And all of them asked the same question: what are you going to do now? I started to realize that Greg's campaign to damage my reputation was backfiring. Instead of making me look bad, it was making him look petty, unprofessional, and insecure. More importantly, it was reminding clients about the value I'd provided and making them question whether Crestline could maintain that level of service without me. The idea of starting my own agency had been percolating in the back of my mind since the firing, but it seemed impossibly daunting. I'd never run a business before. I didn't have startup capital or an office or employees or any of the infrastructure that I assumed was necessary to compete with established agencies. But the client calls changed my perspective. These weren't strangers I'd have to convince to trust me. These were people I'd worked with for months or years, people who'd seen me solve problems and deliver results. They knew my work quality, my communication style, my strategic thinking. Maybe I didn't need to build a client base from scratch. Maybe I already had one. The turning point came during a coffee meeting with Samantha Price at a little place called Brew & Company in South Austin. Samantha had asked to meet in person, ostensibly to catch up, but I could tell she had something specific on her mind. How's the job search going? She asked after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Honestly, it's been challenging. Greg's been vocal about the circumstances of my departure. Word travels fast in Austin marketing circles. Samantha frowned. That's really unprofessional. And short-sighted, frankly. He's going to burn bridges with clients if he keeps bad-mouthing former employees. Maybe. But in the short term, it's making it difficult for me to find a position at another agency. Have you thought about not looking for another agency job? I looked up from my coffee. What do you mean? I mean, why not start your own thing? You've got the skills, the experience, the client relationships. The only thing you don't have is the overhead and bureaucracy that made working at Crestline frustrating. Starting an agency is a huge undertaking. The capital requirements, the legal structure, the operational complexity. Jake, you're overthinking it. You don't need to launch with 40 employees and a fancy office. You need to start with one client and build from there. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Bloom and Butter's contract with Crestline expires at the end of May. We're not renewing. I stared at her. Because of the transition issues. Partly. But mostly because Greg's strategic vision for our brand is completely wrong. He wants to position us as a luxury skincare company competing with brands like La Mer and SKII. That's not who we are, and it's not our market. This was exactly the kind of misalignment I'd worried about. Bloom & Butter was a natural, sustainable skincare company targeting conscious consumers who cared about ingredient transparency and environmental impact. They weren't trying to be a luxury brand, they were trying to be an ethical alternative to mainstream products. He's trying to force you into the wrong category. Exactly. And when I try to explain our actual positioning and target demographic, he gives me this condescending speech about thinking bigger and not limiting ourselves. She rolled her eyes. Sound familiar? Very familiar. So here's my proposition. Start your own agency. Make Bloom & Butter your first client. I'll give you a 6-month contract for the same amount we're currently paying Crestline, $8,000 a month. I nearly choked on my coffee. $8,000 a month. Plus performance bonuses if you hit certain growth targets. Jake, you know our business better than anyone. You understand our customers, our positioning, our challenges. I trust you to develop strategies that actually serve our goals instead of some generic luxury brand fantasy. $8,000 a month would cover my basic living expenses and give me a foundation to build on. More importantly, it would give me credibility. Landing clients is exponentially easier when you can point to existing relationships and ongoing projects. Samantha, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure? Starting a relationship with a brand new agency is risky. Riskier than staying with an agency where the leadership doesn't understand our business and actively dismisses our input. She shook her head. Besides, I'm not taking a risk on a brand new agency. I'm taking a risk on Jake Lawson, who I've worked with for 18 months and who's never let me down. We shook hands right there in the coffee shop. My first client, secured before I'd even filed the LLC paperwork. That afternoon, I called my older brother Evan, who ran a small construction business in San Antonio. He'd started his company 5 years earlier and had navigated all the practical challenges of entrepreneurship, business licenses, insurance, accounting, legal structure, the works. You want to start a marketing agency? He asked after I'd explained the situation. I think so. Maybe. I don't know if I'm crazy or if this actually makes sense. Tell me about the financials. I walked him through Samantha's offer and the potential for additional clients based on the conversations I'd been having. Even if I only land 2 or 3 more accounts, I'd be making more than I was at Crestline, with better profit margins and complete control over strategy and operations. What about startup costs? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I need to establish an LLC, get business insurance, set up accounting systems, build a website, create marketing materials. I'm estimating maybe $15,000 to get properly launched. I can lend you the money, Evan said without hesitation. Evan, that's... It's an investment in my little brother who got screwed over by an asshole boss and is smart enough to turn it into an opportunity. Besides, you're a better risk than most of the loans I've seen banks make. By the end of that week, I had a business plan, a loan from my brother, and a name for my new company, Summit Edge Marketing. The name captured what I wanted to offer clients, a strategic advantage that would help them reach the peak of their potential. I spent the next 2 weeks handling the administrative setup. LLC registration with the Texas Secretary of State. Business bank account. Professional liability insurance. A simple but professional website built on WordPress. Business cards and basic marketing materials designed by a freelance graphic designer I'd worked with at Crestline. The hardest part was psychological. For 6 years, I'd been Jake Lawson, Senior Account Manager. Now I was Jake Lawson, Founder and CEO. It sounded impressive, but it felt terrifying. Every decision was mine to make, every mistake was mine to own, every success or failure would reflect directly on my competence and judgment. But there was also something exhilarating about it. For the first time in my professional life, I could implement strategies I believed in without having to compromise or work around someone else's ego. I could focus entirely on client results without worrying about internal politics or company image or revenue targets that didn't align with good marketing. 3 weeks after being fired for attitude problems, I was sitting in a small co-working space called the Foundry, preparing for my first client meeting as a business owner. Samantha arrived right on time, carrying a folder full of materials and wearing the kind of smile that suggested she was genuinely excited about our partnership. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "tell me about Summit Edge Marketing's vision for Bloom and Butter." I opened my laptop and launched into the presentation I'd spent days perfecting. It covered everything I'd wanted to propose during my time at Crestline but had never been allowed to implement fully. Content marketing focused on ingredient education, influencer partnerships with sustainability advocates, social media campaigns highlighting customer testimonials, email marketing that built genuine relationships rather than just pushing products. "This is exactly what I was hoping for," Samantha said when I'd finished. "Strategic, thoughtful, aligned with who we actually are as a brand. And completely measurable," I added. "Every campaign will have clear KPIs and regular reporting. You'll know exactly what's working, what isn't, and how we're optimizing based on real data." We spent the next hour diving into tactical details, timelines, and success metrics. By the time she left, I had a signed contract and a launch timeline for our first campaign. As I watched her drive away, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't Jake Lawson, former Crestline employee who'd been fired for attitude problems. I was Jake Lawson, founder of Summit Edge Marketing, with one satisfied client and a plan to earn several more. Greg had tried to destroy my reputation and end my career. Instead, he'd forced me to bet on myself in a way I never would have had the courage to do otherwise. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to prove that I'd never work in Austin again, he'd given me the motivation and opportunity to build something bigger and better than anything I could have accomplished as his employee.